Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and let me tell you how it all started. I'm 20 years old, and LVE always considered myself an open-minded girl. I live with my mother, Clara, in a quiet neighborhood. My life was going well, or at least I thought it was until I met Alexander, my mother's boyfriend. My relationship with my boyfriend, Mateo, was going very well. We had been together since high school and shared secrets and goals. But lately something wasn't adding up. The daily conversations we used to have had become boring, and the desire had disappeared. The spark was fading, and that worried me. One day, while I was at home, Elle overheard Mom talking on the phone in her room. It wasn't my style to be an eavesdropper, but something in her voice made me pay attention. I heard his laughter and flirtatious words that I had not heard him say in a long time. Curious, I approached the door and heard Alexander's name. I couldn't believe it. Alexander was Mom's boyfriend. The situation hit me like a bucket of cold water. Alexander was a handsome man, I couldn't deny it. He had a way of smiling that made you feel special, and his piercing eyes seemed to hide secrets. But that didn't justify what I felt when I first saw him. It was a mixture of surprise, confusion, and yes, a hint of attraction. I knew what I was feeling was completely inappropriate. Alexander was Mom's boyfriend, and I was with Matthew. But I couldn't help it, something about him appealed to me in an applicable way. That night, as we ate dinner as a family, my mind wandered. I watched Alexander and Mom interact, and every gesture, every shared laugh affected me disproportionately. I felt like a teenager in love, even though I wasn't anymore. The dilemma began to take shape in my head. What was going on with me? How could I be attracted to Mom's boyfriend? I tried to push those thoughts out of my mind, but the more I did, the more intense they became. The night Mom introduced me to Alexander was one of those I'll never forget. There was a strange tension as we ate dinner together at the dining room table. Alexander was sitting next to Mom, and I couldn't help but notice his eyes resting on me from time to time. I don't know if it was my imagination or if Alexander really looked at me differently. But something in his gaze made me feel special, and that intrigued me. When our eyes met, he looked away quickly, as if he was ashamed to be looking at me. And that only increased my curiosity. Alexander was a mature man, and his appearance reflected it. He had dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. That marked his face. His deep voice and natural confidence made him imposing. It was obvious why Mom was attracted to him. But why was I too? All through dinner I tried to keep my composure and behave as I always did, but I couldn't help but feel nervous every time Alexander addressed me. He seemed so sure of himself, as if he knew the effect he had on women. After dinner, Mom and Alexander retired to the living room to watch a movie, while I stayed in the kitchen picking up the dishes. But my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about the looks Alexander had given me during dinner. Did he think I was cute? Or was it just my imagination playing tricks on me? As I washed the dishes, the sound of laughter and movie music filtered through the half-open living room door. I felt caught in my thoughts, torn between confusion and attraction. I couldn't understand why Alexander, Mom's boyfriend, was affecting me this way. I finished picking up the kitchen and decided to take a walk down the hall, trying to calm down. I stood in front of a mirror and looked at myself. What was going on with me? I was young, I had Matthew by my side, but my mind was full of questions about Alexander. Suddenly, the door to the living room opened, and Alexander appeared in the doorway. He looked at me in surprise, as if he didn't expect to find me there. My heart raced as our gazes met again. Elizabeth, what are you doing here? Alexander asked, and his deep voice made my skin crawl. I swallowed, nervous about his presence. I just needed a moment to myself, I replied, trying to sound as normal as possible. Alexander nodded and moved a little closer. I understand. Sometimes, we all need a moment of solitude. His closeness only intensified my emotions. I was drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. But at the same time I was overcome with confusion. This was wrong in every possible way. Alexander leaned slightly toward me, as if he wanted to tell me something in confidence. Elizabeth, I want you to know that I feel lucky to know you. You are an amazing girl. My cheeks flushed at her words, and my mind filled with questions. What was going on here? Why was Alexander praising me like this? Before I could muster the courage to answer, Mom appeared in the hallway. She looked at us with a raised eyebrow, clearly surprised by our conversation. What are you two doing out here? Mom asked with a forced smile. Alexander and I looked at each other uncomfortably, and his hand alone mine before walking away. Nothing, of course. We were just talking a little, Alexander replied, trying to conceal the tension there was. Mom sensed, but I could see a shadow of doubt in her eyes. Well, I don't want to interrupt your conversation. I'm going back to the living room to finish the movie. Join us anytime, Elizabeth. Alexander nodded, and with one last look at me followed Mom back to the living room. I stood frozen in the hallway, wondering what was going on between us. The night passed slowly, with me caught in a tangle of confused thoughts. I found it hard to concentrate on anything, and every time I crossed paths with Alexander, I felt a strange tension between us. It was as if we shared a secret, one that was dangerous and exciting at the same time. The attraction to Alexander wouldn't leave me, and that filled me with questions. He was Mom's boyfriend, and I had Mateo, a wonderful boy who didn't deserve to be betrayed in any way. But, for some reason, I couldn't help but think of Alexander constantly. As the days went by, our interaction became more frequent. Alexander and I started spending time together when he came to visit Mom. We talked about everything from movies to books, and I felt more and more attracted to him. There was an undeniable chemistry between us, and that only increased the sexual tension. Every situation with Sander seemed to bring us one step closer to an abyss from which we could not escape. My mind was filled with conflicting thoughts and emotions. On the one hand, I was attracted to Alexander in a way I can't explain. His presence, his voice, his look, everything about him fascinated me. On the other hand, guilt tormented me constantly. I knew that what we were doing was wrong, that we were betraying Mom and Mateo, my lifelong boyfriend. One afternoon, as we were sitting on the couch in the living room, Alexander put his hand on mine. His fingers brushed mine gently, and the contact made my heart pound. He knew we couldn't go down this road, but at the same time I found it impossible to walk away. Elizabeth, I need to talk to you about something important, Alexander said softly, as his gaze burned with desire and his words carried a load of innuendo that took my breath away. My throat instantly went dry and my mind clouded. What's wrong? I murmured, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Alexander moved closer to me, narrowing the distance between our bodies. His warm breath brushed my cheek as he spoke. I can't help but think of you, Elizabeth. From the moment I gave you, something changed in me. I can't deny what I feel. My thoughts were blank as her confession filled the room. I knew what was happening was dangerous, but the attraction between us was undeniable. Alexander, this is not right, I said weakly, though my voice betrayed my response. He smiled, there was a bold look on his face. I know, Elizabeth, but sometimes we can't control our desires. I want you to think about it, about us, about what we could do. His words left me breathless, and my mind filled with unanswered questions. I was caught in a moral dilemma, but I was also tempted by the promise of a forbidden adventure. Alexander slowly walked away, leaving a trail of uncertainty and desire. That night, as I lay awake in my bed, I thought about what Alexander had said. I knew I was in the middle of something dangerous and that what was happening between us was wrong in every way. But I couldn't deny that the attraction between Alexander and I was real, intense, and passionate. Mom had no idea what was going on. There were no signs, she didn't suspect anything. And that scared me even more. The thought of betraying her filled me with guilt, but the desire I felt made me play along. It was like being at a dead end, caught between what one knew was right and what my body craved. The next day, Alexander and I avoided getting close or talking about what had happened. The sexual tension was there, but we were both aware of the consequences of our actions. Although the attraction was still there, so that we had decided to put a brake on our impulses, or so I thought. As we continued to share our secret, I wondered how long we could keep up this charade. I knew that at some point we would have to face the truth and decide how we would handle this impossible situation. The moral dilemma I faced was a burden. My mind was torn between loyalty to my mother and the passion I felt for Alexander. I knew that sooner or later I would have to make a decision. But, as is often the case in situations like this, temptation continued to stalk us. One particular evening, Mom said she had an out-of-town meeting and would be out for the night. That day, Alexander and I were left home alone, and the sexual tension between us was almost impossible to bear. Throughout the night we were in the living room, each trying to ignore the attraction we felt. But the passion seemed destined to overflow. Alexander slowly approached me, his eyes burning with desire, and he took me by the waist, his mouth on mine in a desperate kiss that broke the last barrier of restraint. Within seconds, our hands were avidly exploring every inch of our posts. Every caress, every ragged breath, fueled the intensity of our shared desire. It was as if we had been waiting for this moment for so long that we could no longer contain ourselves. Every moment with Alexander caused my skin to cause a surge of heat to spread throughout my body, and my hands responded in kind. Exploring her body with an urgency she could not contain. There was no turning back. We made our way to Mom's, where the messy bed and sheets that smelled of her perfume only added to the tension. We looked into each other's eyes, aware that what we were doing was wrong, that we were betraying Mom and my boyfriend. But at that moment, desire and passion were stronger than any moral dilemma. On Mom's bed, we gave ourselves completely to desire. The act itself was intense, passionate, and full of strong emotions. As we looked into each other's eyes, we knew that what we were doing was not the right thing to do, but at that moment nothing mattered. The room was filled with the fragrance of her perfume, a constant reminder of what had happened in that room. The maelstrom of desires and sensations that was triggered at that moment was very pleasurable. My thoughts turned to desire, passion, and a touch of adrenaline. Not adrenaline from the consequences, but from what was happening at that moment, a moment filled with pleasure and lust. I felt my heart pounding, like a drum beating to the rhythm of our unbridled passion. Mom's room, which minutes before had been a quiet and serene place, was now filled with our energy and desire. The outside world had completely disappeared, and only the two of us existed in that forbidden moment. Alexander and I looked at each other with eyes full of desire and complicity, and I knew that this was not just a passing encounter. We had crossed a line that would change us forever, and although the fear was still present, the need to be together was more powerful. As our breaths became more agitated, and our bodies merged in a fiery, passionate dance, I experienced a sense of fullness I had never felt before. It was as if we had finally found the perfect fit between our bodies and souls. Alexander's skin was warm under my hands, and his scent filled my senses, enveloping me in a cloud of desire. Every time our lips parted, our eyes met in a gaze full of passion and mutual understanding. As if we were communicating on a level far deeper than words could ever express. Despite the intensity of the moment, fear still lurked in some corner of my mind. I knew this had the potential to complicate our lives in a way we could not foresee. But in that instant I was swept up in the ecstasy of the moment, because it was impossible to resist the passion we shared. Our heat continued to intensify, but in the midst of the passion a disturbing thought began to creep into my mind. Mom would be home soon and we needed to erase all traces of our affair before she discovered us. With a breathy sigh, I parted my lips from Alexander's and looked at him urgently. "Alexander, Mom will be back any minute," I whispered, my voice full of concern. Though desire still burned in our eyes, we knew we couldn't let our passion take too much of our eyes. Alexander nodded with understanding, but his eyes reflected the same anxiety I felt. Together, we began to pick up the pieces of our clothes scattered around the room and arrange everything as if nothing had happened. Despite our haste, Our hands occasionally brushed and we couldn't help but smile knowingly, remembering what we had just shared. Finally, we managed to return the room to its previous state, and just as we were finishing, we heard the sound of an approaching car. Mom was on her way back. I looked at Alexander with a panicked gesture, but he gave me a quick, soft kiss on the lips before heading for the back door, as if he were leaving for a casual visit. I tried to look calm as I settled into the couch, trying to hide the turbulence of emotions still running through my body. The sound of keys in the lock announced Mom's arrival and my heart was beating fast. Alexander greeted Mom with a friendly smile as she walked through the door, as if nothing had happened. I too tried to maintain a calm expression, though my mind kept wandering back to Alexander and the intensity of what we had shared. Mom chatted about her day, oblivious to what had actually happened in her absence. I struggled to pay attention to the conversation, but my mind kept reliving the moments of passion we had shared. Guilt and excitement mingled inside me. As the night wore on, I finally managed to relax, at least outwardly. Alexander and I shared furtive glances and secret smiles, knowing that we had shared something unique and powerful. But we also understood that we had to be more careful in the future. We wanted to prevent our secret world from colliding with the reality we shared with Mom. After a quiet dinner where we tried to keep the conversation as normal as possible, Mom and Alexander retired to their room to rest. After that first night of passion with Alexander, things started to get more and more complicated. It was impossible to stop this forbidden affair, and we met on the sly whenever we had the chance. Although I continued with my boyfriend, the relationship became increasingly strained, as my mind and heart were torn between two worlds. Alexander and I shared passionate moments in secret, but we were always aware of the danger this posed. We tried hard to be careful and avoid any situation that might give us away to Mom. Every encounter was one of unbridled passion and fear of being discovered. On the one hand, I loved my boyfriend and didn't want to hurt him. We had shared special moments, we had plans together and a history that I couldn't just throw away. On the other hand, I didn't want to hurt Mom, who trusted me and could never forgive me if she found out what was going on. At this moment, Alexander and I are still experiencing moments of passion and desire, but we also understand that this adventure cannot last forever. Guilt and anxiety have been growing in my conscience, and I know that the time has come to make a decision. Uncertainty overwhelms me. I don't know the right way forward, and the situation is becoming untenable. Every encounter with Alexander increases the desire, but at the same time, every day that passes takes me a little further away from my relationship with my boyfriend and from Mom's trust. I feel like I'm at a crossroads, and any choice I make will have painful consequences. I don't want to hurt the people I love, but I also know that prolonging this situation will only make things worse. I must find the courage to face reality and make a decision, however difficult it may be, before lies and secrets destroy what is left of what I knew as my life. Thank you for being part of this gripping story of infidelity. If you want to continue enjoying and exploring other exciting stories, I invite you to subscribe. Join our community so you won't miss a single video. Click the subscribe button to receive instant updates on our upcoming stories. I look forward to seeing you in our next video. Don't miss it, subscribe now and discover a world of fascinating stories.